Right, so we have to record your findings, and actually the risk assessment is a record itself. So when they say record your findings, the very form that you all are doing, that is a record. Review your assessment date and update if necessary. I think that's part 4 of the NEBOSH risk assessment, right? So I think the bigger part of this, when we had done this, was something called suitable and sufficient, if you remember that. If not, it's right there. They sometimes ask what would make a risk assessment suitable and sufficient. The idea behind it is that one risk assessment is not good for everybody. You can think about disabled persons, right? A risk assessment then, like for a contractor, a laborer then, would be different if the laborer then has some sort of disability, right? And I'm not saying this is something that the person could have been born with. I've mentioned this to you, that maybe the person was injured on the job site and has a bit of a damage, thumb or a toe, whatever have you. So for that person, the risk assessment, the risk to that person may be higher. So the whole thing about suitable and sufficient was tweaking the risk assessment to ensure that it covers everybody. And I mean, really better examples could be pregnant employees, folks with disabilities, and I think I'm missing out one, young persons, right? So if they ask you, what is the criteria for suitable and sufficient, you can pull them from what you're looking at here, right? The criteria is that, let me just read one, the risk assessment should be appropriate. So a criteria is that it must be appropriate to the nature of the work. Another criteria, it must be valid for a period of time. Risk assessments are normally valid for, well, 1 year, right? You can just think about if a company have done a risk assessment and it's 10 years old, in no way then would that be sufficient or even suitable for work in 2021, right? So these are the criteria, you can pull them from there. I've never seen that though, but just remember the idea. I mean, this is something big in safety then, that a risk assessment must be suitable and sufficient. And suitable and sufficient means that it's really the process of, we would say, tweaking or tailoring the risk assessment to suit the needs of the person, hence the word suitable and sufficient, right? So I think that was big there, but I think big in safety, but not really big for the exam, maybe 2 marks. I've never seen it anyway, right? So just to move on here, we would have had different ways of identifying hazards. And like I said, I don't want to read them, I just want to explain them to you. This is if you were doing a risk assessment, where would you get the hazards from? So if you look at what you did for your risk assessment, you would have seen, like, you may have done an inspection.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure if the presentation that I have, the slides, match up with what the ones that you're showing right now.
This is lesson 7. Is it lesson 7 you have?
Yeah, I have session 7 and 8.
Oh, okay.
And there were 40 slides.
But this is missing on yours.
There were 40. But it doesn't seem to correlate at all, because the one you was with before, that was slide 9. My slide 9 has 3.7 sources of health and safety information.
So does it not have this as the front of it, 6 and 7?
I have 7 and 8.
And you're sure that's not lesson 8?
Probably.
I think it's because I have lesson 8. Let me open lesson 8, because we come into lesson 8 in a bit, right? Right, so I did email you all this one, 7 and 8. Are you all seeing this one? Yeah, but we come into that.
That's the one that I printed.
Yeah, I'm actually just, right. So we come into this one, right? The truth is, the one I'm on now, it's really a review from last class then. Should I even say last year?
Right.
Then? Yeah,
okay.
Right? So we would have, more or less, I'm still kind of reviewing. I didn't really want to jump into lesson, the lesson I sent without doing a review first. So this is all about the review from last year.
Okay.
Right? And this would have probably been, remember we took 2 classes to do the project. So this would have been maybe early in December, the end of November, we'd have gotten a look at this anyway. Right. So you probably have it. It's on email, and you can probably just take a look at it. I'm just reviewing anyway. Right. So I was saying that so how could you identify hazards? You could identify hazards if you remember from what you all did from past workplace inspections, right? From a tour, from looking at accident data, from past JSAs. Some of y'all did this. What I'm saying is that those of us who did the project already, or if you remember, there's a part of it in the project where the person said, I then went on to do an inspection. So the reason for doing the inspection and was to get the hazard, right? If you remember the sample NEBOSH risk assessment, it would have said, I then looked at the accident and incident book. See if you understand what I'm getting at here. So why was the person looking at the accident and incident book? They were looking at it to get an idea of like what caused injuries to the person, and what caused the injuries would have been the hazards, right? So I said, there's no need to read all of this, because what this slide is trying to tell you is that there are many ways of identifying hazards. So one of the ways is that you can physically take part in an inspection and observe for yourself. You can look at accident data, you can look at past risk assessments, JSAs, etc. Right? So who are the population at risk? This is step 2 in the risk assessment. And let me just go back and show you what I'm talking about. Step 2 would have been this. Who could be harmed and how? And again, the who could be anybody. So we have here members of the public, operators, maintenance staff, cleaners, visitors, contractors. All of this we did before. One of this is on a recorded session already. Young persons, disabled persons, etc. Evaluate the risk. We mentioned this as there are 2 ways to evaluate the risk. You can use words like high, medium, or low. Or you can use the formula by saying 5 by 5, 25, 5 by 3, 15. These though are not on the NEBOSH risk assessment template, but this is usually your step 3, right? A typical matrix is like this. You can get a lot of these matrices on the internet anyway. I have one here. And then you record the risk assessment. All of this is saying, once you do your risk, so some of this is going to fall now to the lesson that we have to go to, that once you evaluate your risk, you have to put controls in place. And the lesson we're going to pick up from now is the hierarchy of control. Also, there's something called the principles of prevention, which is something like the hierarchy of control. So this is exactly what we're going to go into now. Residual risk is that once you put your controls in place, you normally have to calculate the risk again. And that second calculation you do is termed as the residual risk. It's a risk that remains after you put controls in place. For example, if someone was on a scaffold without a harness and the risk was 25, and then your control was to issue a harness to the person. Now, issuing the harness may not have brought the risk down to 1, but it may have brought it down to less than 25. So from 25, it may be 15, and that 15 is termed the residual risk, right? So I think I had one here, someone using an electric kettle, the risk being, likelihood is 5 of maybe being shocked. Severity is 4, 5 by 4 is 20. 20 is sort of high on the grand scale of things. If you go back to this here, 20 is sort of between 17 and 25. So it is unacceptable. What we do there is stop the job, and then we put controls in place. So controls is what we come into now. So the controls here would be regular maintenance, something called PAT testing. PAT stands for Portable Appliance Testing, something they have in the UK in their law for electricity. And with those controls in place, I also have frequent inspection. The risk would have come down to 2 by 3, 6. And this is what is termed residual risk here. The second risk number is termed residual risk, right? And that there would have been, I guess, more or less, I have another one there on a spreadsheet. And then when do we review a risk assessment? This is almost the same as when you review the health and safety policies, whenever you have changes. So change in critical staff, change in places, change in process, After an accident, the results from health monitoring. So these slides are very good because, like I said, this could be a question. This is a nice question, like maybe five reasons to review a risk assessment. Again, if you have it printed, it's just to pull it from off the slide, right? And there was an ACOPS so that the definition of accident, definition of risk, and here would have been a category of hazards. For those who haven't done the project as yet, not that you have to use this slide, but remember you normally have to use your second textbook, the NG2 textbook, because every chapter in that book is a different hazard. But what I've done here is put some categories out for you all, right? So all of these categories are in the second textbook: slip, trips, and fall, manual handling, electricity, transport. You get the idea anyway. So you could use that, if you wanted maybe to verify what you were seeing in your book as a hazard category. I think the syllabus says it nice though. Or should I say the project guidance? The project guidance actually tells you what some of the hazard categories are, right? So all of that to say that this is the review from last class, the last actual teaching class. And we're gonna take it up there now where once we have done the risk assessment, let me get the slide for you. Hopefully I didn't close it off there. Right. So once you get the risk assessment done, you have to put the controls in place. And this is the one that was sent to you this week, right? 78. So you'll see it starts off the same way. We're going to now talk about controls because, as I mentioned before, once you have done the risk assessment, you want to put controls in place to reduce the risk. So the revision is what I just did. I just reviewed the 5 steps. I reviewed the ways of calculating risk, high, medium, low, or you use numbers, and what influences the review of a risk assessment, which is whenever you have changes to technology, changes to persons, places after an accident, etc. Right? So you see how it flows there. Like I said, I didn't want to just jump into lesson 8 today without reviewing what we did, because we did really have the 2 classes to end the semester. We're not really teaching classes, but they were really project-based classes anyway, right? So as I mentioned here before, I wouldn't be reading every time. We're gonna explain. So what I wanna show you here is that in terms of controls, you can put different, I guess, a different variety of controls in place. You can put technical controls in place, behavioral controls in place, and procedural controls in place. Again, it is an open book exam. I don't think these things are going to come, but when we say a control, and what you should bear in mind is that the control falls into one of those categories. Like if you say, issue a harness to the person, that may have been a technical control, right? If we had said maybe train the person, that may have been a behavioral control. If we had said issue the person with a permit to work, that may have been a procedural control. So controls typically, even if you don't, most of us know that if a generator is making noise and you put a muffler on the generator, that's a technical control. If the generator is making noise and you issue PPE to the workers, that may still be technical, but it may also be behavioral, because you'll want your workers to actually put on the air plugs or air defenders. And again, if you issue some sort of procedure where unauthorized persons must stay away from the generator, that is going to be a procedural control, right? So notwithstanding that, I don't think that was very important there. I think the idea is that whenever we give a control, it either falls into those categories there, right? So I'm explaining. So what you'll need to know is that controls fall under this regulation here, known as the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. And just in case you lost what I'm talking about, we are saying if you do a risk assessment and the risk turns out to be 20, 25, you need to put controls in place. And what this law is saying that, so I'm just going to read this latter one here. Principles of prevention. Preventing what? Meaning preventing the high risk is an approach that employers and self-employed should use to direct their approach towards identifying and implementing the necessary control measures. So what does this mean for you? what this means for you, again, if any making writing sub notes, remember you're not going to be actually remember none of these things. What you should know here is that the hierarchy of control is mentioned in this law here then. I should probably rephrase that and say that that's probably implied, because it's implied here, control measures. Because I know these videos make it to YouTube, and then next thing someone who knows that I'm not telling you all the truth, right? So it is really implied, right? So you see it here, they didn't really say hierarchy of control, but they say you must implement the necessary control measures, right? So all you need to know is that controls then is a requirement of the law, right? There's also a requirement for reducing the risk, otherwise you'll be putting your workers at a higher risk then, right? And I'll go a little bit slow here. What I want to tell you is that the law on top there, the management regs, mention two forms of control, or should I say, I guess the way to help you understand this, it's like if someone is going to, I would use San Fernando because for this it may be more difficult. So if someone is coming to the city of San Fernando, there are more than one ways then to get to San Fernando, right? You can probably come in from Gulf City side. That's a mall anyway, the Gulf City side there. Or you can probably drive up a bit on the highway and come in from Rushwood Street. You can probably go further up to Monrepo and take the roundabout and come through Cipero Street, right? And that is the idea I want to tell you here. So what the law is saying here, well, at least I give you three there, but the law is saying that there are two ways to reduce the risk. And one of those ways is known as the principles of prevention. The other one is known as the hierarchy of control. Let's see if you understand it. There are two ways of reducing the risk. I could grab the marker a bit, but you know, it slows down the presentation. So I tried to put it on the side here though. And it didn't activate. I didn't click the marker there. Right, so if the risk is, let's say the risk is high for some event, let's look at height. I'm going to use some numbers here, maybe the same numbers than before, 5 by 4, 20. What we know for those of us in safety is that we had to stop the job because this is too high and we had to put controls in place. So what I'm saying now for today's class is that the management regs is saying that there are two forms of control we can use. We can use something called the, I'm just going to use the P here, the principles of control. And then there's another thing called the hierarchy of control. What you need to know is that they are both different, but they both achieve the same thing, right? It's like coming into the Govview Link Road, it's different from going up to Cipero Street. It's a different street. But at the end of the day, you will be back in San Fernando. So I say that to tell you because if an exam was to ask you what are the principles of prevention to be applied, you have to take it from here. You have to take it from this slide then. And if they ask what is the hierarchy of control or what are the ways to control risk from the hierarchy of control, you have to take it from the other side. I can't show you this slide because I've used the marker there, so it will freeze the screen for a couple of minutes, right? So let me just show you the principles of prevention. What I'm saying is that both of them do the same thing, which is they reduce the risk. Right? The first thing the principles of prevention said is try to avoid the risk then. So if we could have avoided the person from going up to the top here, try to avoid the risk. Then if you couldn't avoid the risk, evaluate the unavoidable risk by a risk assessment. Combat the risk at the source. Now, some of them, for those who know the hierarchy, maybe what I should do, let me just clear the screen. Take off the markers, I'll show you, because some of you all know the hierarchy already. Some of you all may have known it from previous courses, right? So those of us who know the hierarchy already, the hierarchy of control goes like eliminate, substitute, right? The slides aren't working as fast as my fingers clicking it, right? So those of us who know the hierarchy, eliminate, substitute, engineering controls, administrative controls, PP. These are the ways to reduce the risk, but it's a hierarchy because they wanted to start from the top. A hierarchy means use the one that are at the top. And if that one wasn't feasible, then you go to the other one. So the hierarchy says eliminate. So if you couldn't eliminate the person working from height, but then you sort of try to change something around, substitute, but this mightn't work for working at height. But maybe we could use an engineering control. Maybe the person didn't have to go on a scaffold. Maybe we could have gotten a HIAB, if you know what that is, to bring whatever was at height to ground level. Maybe we could use a mobile elevated working platform, right? So the idea is that when you use these controls, and these will fall under sort of technological anyway, that you do reduce the risk. So what I want to show you is that it is like a play on words then. See if you're seeing that. If you go with these back and forth, the principles of prevention and the hierarchy of control, they say the same thing, but it's like a play on words. So the principles of prevention say try to avoid, but isn't trying to avoid the same as eliminating, right? So try to avoid is the same as eliminate, and some of them sound like that, like this one here. Consider technological or technical progress. Now, when you say consider technological progress, that's almost the same as saying engineering controls. Because in engineering controls, we look at what is the best technology, like the muffler, the one I mentioned before, right? To reduce noise. So it's a play on words then, right? If we look at this one here, replace the dangerous by the non-dangerous or the less dangerous. In the principles of prevention, replace the dangerous by the non-dangerous or less dangerous, and that sounds almost like substitute, right? What I want to tell you here, so because it's an open book exam, you do not have to remember them. What you need to be aware of is if the question says principles of prevention, you have to pull it from here. You have to take the answers then from the principles of prevention. You cannot say then that to reduce the risk using the principles of prevention is eliminate, right? Eliminate is not in the principles of prevention. Eliminate is in the hierarchy of control. You cannot then say substitute. Substitute is not in the principles of prevention. It is, the idea is there, but it's said a different way, which is replace the dangerous by the non-dangerous, right? So in time past, NEBOSH have commented on that students have mixed it up, but that's because they had to learn it. You all don't have to learn it by heart. All you have to know that it's 2 roads to get into San Fernando, right? It's 2 different roads, but they achieve the same thing anyway. So tell me if you're okay with that. I want to move on because we have more work to do. And that you don't have to learn it by heart. Like I said, the exam format is much different now. You just have to know where to find them, right? And how to use them. And if the question does direct you to that they want the controls from the hierarchy, then fine, you take it from this one. You say these words then, administrative controls. You say things like procedures and JSAs and stuff. And if they say principles of prevention, well, then you come to this slide here, right? All of these are easily found on Google. Coming closer to the exam, I'll give you like a hint, but I can't do that on a recording. I'll have to come up the recording and give you something. There's a nice way to find all of these things on Google, right? All of these things you can get it on Google, right? But we talk about that on another time, right? Sources of health and safety information. This is very simple. This is the sources of information within the company. Can't get easier than that. Like what are sources of information within a company? I'll take some from here. The idea is, I guess your very employees is a source of information. The risk assessments that you do, any inspections, anything that you do on your document is a source of information, maintenance record, the intranet, etc. What are sources of information external to an organization? This used to come before. Again, it's not very famous in these open book exams. But like a way for this to come is they may ask me, I'm literally making up a question on the spot here. For instance, maybe the employer does not know something and they want to research it. So where would the information come from? You all should know that from lesson 1. The answer normally comes from ACOPs and guidances. And because these were really from the health and safety executive, these are external. So if you get information from Google, that is external. Enforcing authority like OSHA or the HSC, consultants, institutes, IOSH being one of the bigger ones of them. European Union, I guess you get the idea. Journal, magazines. This is a magazine here. The SHP magazine is the #1 magazine for health and safety worldwide. So it's pretty simple from the slides. If you had to get information from, well, not if, but if you did know something, maybe where could you get it from? Consultants, books, journals, online, the internet, approved codes and practices, guidances, and that really, again, is a simple question if you put your mind to it, and a lot of answers are on these slides anyway, right? Google, for those of us who know about Google Scholar, there's something called Google Scholar. Those of us, a lot of you all have a degree already. Google Scholar is a good source of journals then, right, for health and safety. But it's a simple question, so I'll move on. The answers are there anyway, right? So what influences an employer when adopting risk control measures? The answer for that could be finances, but also the answer could be, like if the risk is acceptable, then like if it's acceptable in terms of the law, because if it's not accepted in terms of the law, company may get a fine. So the thing is they may want to reduce it. This may be more legal and financial here. What may influence an employer when adopting a risk control measure, in that what it means is like what will cause an employer to choose PPE as opposed to eliminate. And I mentioned one of them is finances. If the employer had a choice to eliminate or to give PPE may be cheaper than to issue an earplug, right? But then for some companies, monies is not an issue. So them, a lot of companies are concerned with how low the risk could actually be reduced. So that's like a moral reason. Having reduced risk to the lowest then will be good for the company, right? So that's a weird question there. So the next big one here is safe systems of work. And again, like I said, I would not be reading slide by slide. I will be explaining. So hopefully you have some sort of pencil or pen around, right? So what you need to know here is that a safe system of work is a part of the hierarchy of control, right? So this is on the hierarchy of control. It's also on the principles of prevention. If you wonder where it is, but it's right here, I'll go back and I'll show you. So you could write it in if you want. The safe system of work will fall under here, administrative control, right? And maybe, I guess if you're not seeing it, it's because you don't know what a safe system of work is. So to make it simple for you, again, I wouldn't grab the marker, right? But a safe system of work is a JSA, a job safety analysis. A safe system of work is a JSA. And if you still don't know what a JSA is a piece of paper then. It's a document. So it falls under administrative control, right? I do have one in this slide. So if we go forward, you'll see a format of one. So safe systems of work is, in fact, I want to grab the marker a little bit here. And that's, again, if you're writing for yourself, fine, but I want to just make this point here that there are two safe systems of work mentioned here on your course. One of them is the JSA. So I wanted to see this, that a JSA is a safe system of work. For those who don't know what that means, it's exactly what the words mean. It's a safe way of doing work. A JSA is a procedure for doing work, but it's a safe procedure for doing work, right? So one example of a procedure or an administrative control here is a safe system of work, of which we have a JSA as an example. And another example is a permit to work. Both of them, they are on your slides already, for those who read through this slide. Right? So these are the two, think of this as a document. These are two documents. For those who know, this is a piece of paper as well. This is also a piece of paper. So they fall under administrative control. So then these are two procedures for doing work in a safe way. Right? Hopefully you saw it. I have to clean it to be able to move on, right? So here we have, there's a big definition for a safe system of work. So by chance, if they ask you that, it's right there. In times past, I have spent a whole day talking about this definition, which I wouldn't anymore because no one has to remember it. What you need to know is that this JSA, Safe System of Work, includes a group of persons to get it done then, it's like a team of people. The JSA and the permit to work have a format. It's laid out in a considered method of working. Each of them have the format. It's already on your handout. Each have their own format, right? And what does these things do? What does a JSA and a permit to work do? It enables you to do work safely. So it's the integration of personnel, articles, and substances in a format, which is a laid out and considered method of working, which takes into account the risk to employees as well as non-employees. And the aim is to get it done in a safe way to ensure all the steps necessary for safe working have been anticipated and implemented. So I've mentioned this before. The two examples are there. I wouldn't read, like I said, everything for you. So the next big thing I wanted to focus on here is really, well, what I have here is the format, but the format is already on the table. So if I go to the table, you'll see it. This little piece here used to be important in that a safe system of work then is a legal requirement. If you remember the Act, it's on page 24, I believe, section 2(2)(a) of the Act. The HSW Act says to provide safe plant and safe systems of work, which is a JSA. It's here again. So to see the format of a JSA, we can come straight to the table. So this is talking about competent persons must be involved in the JSA. Who are competent persons, the role of competent persons, managers, right? And what they do on HSA, etc., right? So the importance of involving persons, if you wonder where this is coming from the word here, the integration of personnel. I tell you, one person cannot really do a JSA. It's a group of persons coming together. They refer to that as the integration of personnel. So we have the personnel here. Competent persons then, right? HSA, maybe a consultant, if you have one, employees, technicians, supervisor. So that's what you're seeing here. If you read it, you'll see managers and supervisors, subcontractors, contractors, right? Persons who know what they're doing then. An employee may not have a degree, but a person may know how to make a box drain, right? So they are the subject matter experts. So those are the ones that need to, like, if a safety, okay, like if I was going to do a JSA for a box drain, I don't know how to make a box drain. I have an idea, but the persons who actually do it will be able to tell you all of the hazards that are bending the steel and whatever have you, and, you know, putting it down into the cage, etc. So then those are the persons who are able to give you a better idea. And the little point is that a JSA is not done by one person, but by a team of personnel, right? So we mentioned the three forms of controls: technical, behavioral, procedural. You should know that JSAs fall under procedural. So this is a given anyway, right? So the JSA process, what do we do? For those who know it, I'll break it down for you here. And a lot of you all know it. What they will do, they will take a task and they will, but the task is what they have to do. So if it's welding or maybe cleaning out a stock room or warehouse or whatever have you, moving components, metal from one station to another station. So they will take the task, and like I said, these are on the table. So I could have done it for you on the table. So they'll take the task. So the task could, and I have one here, so I'll go to the one just now, right? So they'll take a task and then they'll break that task down into some steps, like every logical step that should be done. And it's really broken down to the simplest then. Like if it was something simple as taking the components from the left-hand table, lifting it up using proper manual handling techniques, carrying it to the right-hand table and putting it down. So it's written in a way that it's said to be foolproof, meaning that if anybody could read, and it's also written in a simple way too, that once you follow the steps, you should be safe, which is why it's called a safe system of work. So with every step, what they do, they consider what is the hazard of every step. Some companies consider what is the risk of every step, and then they put the controls with every step. So if we go to the table, you see I have one here. You take a task, you break it down into some job steps. At every step, you consider what is the hazard. You consider what is the risk. Now, some companies don't do this. Some companies do put the risk with it. I think it's a good idea to put the risk with it. And but at its heart, though, in the core concept, a JSA doesn't really calculate risk. But I did this because I know a lot of companies do this because it makes a lot of sense then. But at its heart, if you go back to the definition, the JSA really shouldn't calculate the risk. But all companies I know that do a JSA, a good JSA, they sort of put the risk with it as well, right? But by definition, a JSA is really just looking at the task, breaking it down into some steps and putting the control measures. But a lot of companies do the risk with it, right? And then once the risk is there, you put the controls in place. To the end of the slide I had before, they said what you'd have to put like a date for it, like the date that it was done, when to review the JSA, etc. Right? And that is in a nutshell, sorry, what a JSA is. It is a step-by-step broken down version of the task that you have to do, and it's an analysis of the hazard and the controls in place with every single step. It is a piece of paper, remember that? So it falls under procedural controls or administrative controls, right? The other one I want to get to, well, once you have done a JSA, the folks who come up with would have to train persons in how to use it and how to follow the instructions in it. So that's what this is all about, instruction and training, right? Monitoring the systems that people are following the JSA, right? So to ensure the procedure is effective in reducing risk associated with the hazard, why do you need to monitor it? And monitoring the JSA, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, is that a lot of companies on a quarterly basis, they would actually, I'm going to use the phrase, like pull the JSA. They will sample it and they will sample the JSAs to make sure that who had to sign this did sign it. They'll make sure that the steps in it, the job steps here are being followed. And if it's not being followed, if you have a good quality system, then that will be a cause of concern then, right? So that's what I mean by monitoring the JSA there, because if you don't monitor it, you can never tell and if someone is, you know, like jumping a step, right? So they cut in corners and they're just going from step 1 to step 4 anyway, right? So that is in a nutshell a JSA. Just see if you have any questions on it there. I'm trying to think, but there have been no such questions on the last OBEs anyway, right? Such deep questions and as it pertains to JSAs, right? An old question used to be like, what are the factors to consider in developing a JSA? And the answers for that is that you're going to have to start at the beginning. You have to start by considering the personnel, the managers, the supervisors, the employees, the subject matter experts, and they have to come together. Next thing you want to, is right on the form, those answers are on the form. I think I'll say it again if anybody write it, right? What you consider in developing a JSA, you have to consider, do we have the people to analyze the task then? Do we have the managers, supervisors, consultants, subject matter experts? And if you do, fine. So the first thing you consider is that. Next thing you have to consider is what is the task? What task is being done? Is it changing a spare tire? Is it moving components from, I guess, storage bay, right, to maybe a shelf or whatever have you? So what is the task? Then they have to consider, the team have to consider what is the steps. And they cannot jump a step. So this is a bit of analysis here that have to be done. Like, how does the sequence go? What is the chronological sequence of the steps then? Right? And then with every step, you consider the hazard. With every hazard, you consider the risk. With every risk, you consider the controls. Last but not least, you date it. You put a review date. And maybe you put your name on it, the persons that the JSA team that had completed the JSA. Right? I think something you need to consider here too is money. That the team will have to have access to like resources then. Because if we say things like wear hand gloves, right? Gloves would be, maybe they have to purchase that. So, I mean, this is a simple one. So it's based on what you say, the controls may require money. So one of the things you need to make a JSA effective is that you need the support from the bosses, from the CEO, from the managers. You need the support to roll it out, which is the training part of it, to get people trained in using it. But you also need monies to purchase whatever have to be purchased, PPE, there's any emergency device that have to be bought. He have mentioned something about dust monitoring or dust measurement. So it does require the support. So please make a note of that. One of the main things at the JS is that you need the support of the managers in terms of rolling it out, training and whatever have you, but you need the financial support. Otherwise, what is the use of that piece of paper then? All right, so any questions there? I'm looking at the time. We have one more to do, which is permit to work. So permit to work, as I've just mentioned, if you remember the thing I drew, that a permit to work is also a safe system of work. It is also a document. However, it has a different form, a different format than as the table that you are seeing here. This is a format for a JSA, right? A permit to work has a different format anyway. So the main thing you need to know about a permit to work is that it is a type of safe system of work, meaning it's a way of getting work done in a safe way. But a lot of you all know that it's really used for high-risk jobs then, right? Used where the potential risks are high and careful coordination of activities and precautions is essential for safe working. So the difference between the two types of safe systems of work is quite different in terms of their format. But what you should know too is that, I guess for being simple and making it sound simple is that a safe system of work is meant for, it could be meant for everyday activities. In fact, what you saw here was changing a spare tire on a busy highway. So not to say that that's an everyday activity, but it's more for normal activity. Whereas a permit to work is only meant for those activities that are high risk, right? So if you don't know what that is, of course, it's on this slide. This part it talks about who have responsibility for the permit to work, and this is normally somebody called an authorized person. You could write it down if you want. The authorized person can be the safety, but it doesn't have to be the safety at the same time, right? So this is the person that would actually issue you with a permit and would be actually the one to take back the permit from you. I'll talk about that in a bit, right? So the permit to work, it's a special, and if you look at it, it's a special type of safe system of work. It's meant for high risk activities, and it's sort of given to you by an authorized person, right? You can't just get it anyway then, like from the company's folder or whatever have you. They have a place where they have documents. It's not like that. It's really, it is really issued to you, if it's to be effective anyway, by an authorized person, and it's taken back by that authorized person as well. So we'll come to this format in a bit, right? I want to show you some of the activities that require, because this could be more of a question for you. Some of the activities that are classed as high risk could be loan work, electrical work, hot work, entry into confined spaces, pressurized systems, and excavation work. So all of these are classed as high risk work. So they require what is called a permit to work, right? I want to check your book and see what used to happen, and I know I'm pretty much sure that the book doesn't have one. What they had on the book from before, right? Page 53, sorry, 55 of chapter 3, you'll find safe systems of work there. They used to have these nice forms, and this last version of the book took out all of the forms, right? So there used to be a nice permit to work right there. If anybody have the older book, right, which is a book, I guess I'm 2 years now, right? They used to have these really nice samples, right? So I guess if we look at page 60, you'll see some of the slides that we are on, sorry, types of activities that require a permit, right? Electrical work, same thing on this slide. confined spaces is what you're seeing right here. Work at height. So it's on your book, right? The only thing though is that they don't have any form. And I guess what that means is that they would probably not test the form, right? But the slide I left out, what I said I was going to come back to, this slide here is like what you see on the form itself, right? So no, I do have some soft ones if you want, if anybody wanted to see a permit, I could probably email it to you, right? During the course of the week. You can actually try to download a permit to work format if you want to. And this is what you'll see on the most permit to work, they will have this word in it, isolation. This is key to a permit to work. One of the categories in a permit then, right? It would really be, if I could have tried to put one here, like a form, right? So one of the headings then, what I'm trying to, these things you're looking at here are really headings. So one of the headings is the word isolation on a permit to work. And isolation means that you make sure any source of energy, electricity, water, oil, solids, make sure isolation means it's locked off and turned off, and it's prevented from being re-energized. A lot of persons associate that with something called lockout and tagout, LOTO, coming out of the word isolation, making sure that if there is I guess if you want me to draw, like if there is like a pipeline and it's going into a tank, you could probably think of like an oil tank, right? So like make sure that if work is to be done inside of this tank here, let's say welding or whatever have you, some folks sort of go inside there and weld, you have to make sure that if this was a valve, that this valve is actually turned off, but it's also locked off, and locking here could be like with a chain and a physical lock, right? And that's to prevent it from anybody coming by and opening who may not know that workers are inside of a tank there anyway, right? So all of that goes with the word isolation. I'm saying though that, again, these exams are not focusing on this anymore, but this slide, and trying to explain this slide is showing you here what are the headings on a permit. Isolation. Another heading will be the signature of the managers. And one of the signature I mentioned, I'm going to probably put it at the bottom here, is the word authorized person. I mentioned that word here before. So it's only if this person signs the permit then, what it means that the job could go on. That's what do you mean by authorization, right? Signature of managers authorizing the job. Signature and date of all person. You think you get the idea? So these, I just did two for you here, right? So these are things that are on the permit. I'll probably mention one for you again, which is, well, I mentioned two for you again, right? Because I think it's important. A permit normally have something called a time life. A time life, you could just write the word life there for me. Time life meaning that a permit, unlike a JSA that may be in effect for the whole day, the permit may just be in effect maybe like for a couple of hours then. If someone was inside of a tank, well, then it may not take them an hour to weld on what they had to weld, right? If it's something to repair. So the time life is like the time in which the high risk job is being done. I'm going to put there half an hour. And one of the things I mentioned about the authorized person also have to, at the end of the task, ensure the task is completed, and they have to cancel the permit. Not cancel the job, they have to cancel the permit. When they cancel the permit, then they could remove this lock on whatever they have here, and oil, which may be what they use for production, which is production anyway, could get back into the tank. But the authorized person have to ensure that the work is completed and all, safety measures have been put in place. The tank has been bolted up and drained and whatever have you. And once everything is up to mark, then they have to cancel the permit, right? This lock here, the lock and whatever, it cannot be removed unless the person signs, the same authorized person, the one who issued the permit, have to now come and cancel the permit. So there used to be a lot of this on the NEBOSH course. Again, nothing of this nature is coming anymore, but in the hope of trying to explain what the format of a permit looks like and how different it is from the JSA, this is what I can give you here, that it does have some unique headings on it, like isolation. A permit is unique because it has a time life. It is given by an authorized person that also have to come and cancel the permit for work to keep on going, for this valve here to be reopened anyway, right? So I'll leave that there because that's what the slides have anyway. And I have overdone it, like I said, many times in teaching this in class, but that is because, again, students have to know it much more than how we have to know it for this exam now anyway, right? What you need to take home from that, let me just try to summarize as they're trying to get the marker out here. What you need to take home, for I guess, from this for your open book exam is that a permit to work is a piece of paper. It is a document. It is a safe system of working. However, it's a safe system of work that is only meant for high risk activities then, right? And those of us who know why I kind of cringe there, because, you know, those of us who know safety know that that's actually not technically true, but this is level 3, so I'll say high risk activities, right? But so some high risk activities, the marker doesn't seem to want to come off now. Some high risk activities include electrical work, work at height, you have it in your book, confined spaces, work on pressurized vessels. And to get those jobs done, you need to be given the permit, which is a piece of paper, but it has to be filled out. And these are some of the headings you have. And these are only some, you have more than 20 headings on a permit to work anyway, but these are the main ones. All permits that have isolations, it would have the main signature of the authorizing persons. It would have things like PPE. I didn't have that on my slide. I think I have it on the other slide though. Things like the PPE requirements and stuff like that, right? But yeah, so types of permits there. And let's quickly get into this last one for today, confined spaces. Now, the reason for this, if anybody wondering, again, like for example, why have we singled out confined space? Why have they not done, you know, like why have they not done work at height? Or if you look at it, right, they have electrical work there. The thing is, confined space is on the syllabus, so that's why confined space has been singled out here, right? So to get into confined spaces, well, I think a lot of persons here misunderstand what a confined space is. A lot of persons, like for example, I saw it in your project, a lot of persons would have said maybe the place where they are working is a confined space. And what you need to know that may not be true. A confined space has a definition, right? And what I'm trying to say here is that the space you are working in may be limited in that you may have clutter, and you may have a small working space, but it's in no way a confined space. Know that the term confined space then means something we'll see on the other slide, right? But confined does not mean limited, right? Or limited to like an office space. I'm talking about that, right? This is the misconception that some persons are saying that the office space is a confined space, but it's not. So then what is a confined space? The answer is here. They say a confined space is a space that is substantially closed out and could give rise to one of the following specified risks. This is the definition, by the way. The definition came from the law here, the Confined Space Regulation 1997. So let's see if your office classes as a confined space. So they say it's a space that is substantially closed off, and the criteria for being a confined space is that it must give rise to one of these risks here: injury from fire or explosion, unconsciousness due to rise in body temperature and asphyxiation, drowning, asphyxiation caused by free-flowing solids. And when you think of that, then these, in your office space, then you really cannot, you know, some of these don't fit into your office space then. So then these criteria then, like what would make a space a confined space, will more fit into things like a tank, a vessel, a pipe, a silo then, right? A manhole, I guess, in the subway systems anyway, or the drainage systems. These things are more apparent then, for example, like in a tank, right? As I was saying before, fires and explosion, unconsciousness, rise in body temperature, a vessel. So by definition, then vessels and pipes and tanks and whatever have you are classed as a confined space because you really cannot, under normal conditions, asphyxiate. Asphyxiate means difficult to breathe in your office, right? Or you become, unless if you had maybe some sort of ailment before, but what I'm saying is that the ailment is linked to maybe your unconsciousness, whereas in terms of a confined space, these things are linked to the space themselves, like a tank, a vessel, a pipeline, etc. Right? So those are the definitions of a confined space. And what must be done? Well, the idea here is to use the control of hierarchy, avoid working the confined space, maybe modify the confined space. And this is if you do have to work in a tank. Factors to consider in a risk assessment if you're doing that for maybe confined space work. Consider what is the hazard posed by the work. What is the previous contents of the space? Maybe it is a tank, so if it had oil in it, it would be hydrogen sulfide. Consider the risk of contamination from nearby articles and substances. For confined space, below ground, for example, the gas station, the storage tank, consider the ingress of substances, for example, soil and leachate. Consider in those spaces oxygen deficiency or enrichment, the space layout, gas accumulation, emergency rescue procedures. And that's where we're going to end this one and pick up with emergency rescue tomorrow. So suitable rescue, once you are going into a confined space, again, I am sorry, this book took out all the pictures. I don't know why. But anyway, this is how the course has come to now. They used to have some really good rescue pictures in the book. If you don't know what suitable rescue is in a confined space, the most I'll tell you here to give you the visual of it is a fireman, right? The rescue team here that have to go into a tank must be in the full PPE then as a firefighter who is actually fighting a fire, right? You'll have to be in the full, what they call self-contained breathing apparatus, SIBA, with the oxygen or the air tank strapped to your back, etc. So a lot of companies who do work in tanks, they have rescue teams. Hummingbird, HHSL is one of them, and so many others anyway. So those persons must be trained. So suitable rescue includes reducing risk during rescue to the lowest reasonably practicable level, provision of resuscitation equipment when conditions required. The rescue teams will have to have that, and the team will have to be trained. So retraining, rehearsals, and drills. You'll have to have communication techniques. Some of them probably being hand signals or radio signals anyway, walkie-talkies anyway. They need to consider likely cause of an emergency. For example, maybe someone panicking inside of a tank or a vessel. They would have tested for oxygen and gases before, so it's hardly likely that those things would happen. If someone is in a tank or a vessel, it would have been isolated. So it's hardly likely that fluid or oil or gas will come in there. Most of the time, it could have a defect maybe in the person's oxygen supply, or the person started to panic or fainted or whatever have you, right? So use of equipment, they must be tested, maintained, malfunctions and defects checks carried out the rescue team, emergency procedures, method of sounding the alarm, contact liaison with emergency services. A lot of times if the local emergency team is doing a rescue, they have to contact the hospital or the closest medical center. Methods of shutting down the plant, the safeties that I've seen about that, and even I guess using an extinguisher or contacting the full fire services. So this is going to be picked up in lesson 9 next week. I'm going to have to send you that. But really and truly, just to let you know something here, the simple question we have seen sometimes coming out of this is, what is 5 emergencies a company must have a plan for? So I would say that, but that's actually what I'm going to pick it up next week. Like, what is 5 emergencies a company must have a plan for? You can think about them, but I'm probably going to mention 2: fire, terrorism, gas leak, right? I want to review, folks. It's about 20 past 10. Remember, I have another class. So just to cut all of this down into one today, we started off by looking at a review of last year's work, risk assessments, the 5 steps. We went into how to identify the hazards by looking at accident reports and past JSAs and past risk assessments and doing an inspection. We looked at who could be harmed: contractors, trespassers, employees, technicians, supervisors. And we went into, once you do the risk assessment, you have to put controls in place. We left that lesson there. That was lesson 7, getting into lesson 8. The controls seem to be dictated by a law. The law was the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations. I could try to find it back for you. 1999. And literally that law said that there were 2 formats of controls to be put in place. Yes, I know there were 3 categories here, but I'm talking about the law. The law mentioned there were 2 formats of controls. One is known as the principles of prevention. The other one is known as the hierarchy of control. Both of them, though, if correctly applied, would reduce the risk to an acceptable level. The catch with this is that if an exam asks you for the principles of prevention, you have to take your answers from the principles of prevention. And if they ask you for the hierarchy, then you take it from the hierarchy. Literally after this, the next major thing we did source of information and stuff, right? But the next major thing we did was looking at safe systems of work, which fell within administrative controls. The reason is that a safe system of work is a piece of paper. Literally, it's a form. It's a form that this table is on anyway. Did I pass it? Sorry, right? Yeah, so literally it is a form that this is printed on a piece of paper. So a safe system of work is a procedure. So it fell under administrative controls. And there were 2 types of them, a JSA and a permit to work. What I'll summarize and tell you is that each one have their own format. But we are looking at the format here for a JSA, in that you will get a team together, personnel, supervisors, managers, take a task, break the task down into some steps. With every step, consider the hazard. With every hazard, consider the risk. With every risk, consider the controls, right? So that was JSAs. Once you have them, you have to train people in using them, and you have to have the support of your managers financially, I guess, as well as morally, to get people to follow these steps anyway, right? The next safe system of work we saw briefly was a permit to work. It is a safe system of work, but it's special. Why is it special? Because it's meant for high-risk activities. Some of those high-risk activities included what you're looking at here: electrical work, hot work, entry into confined spaces, pressurized systems, permit to excavate. And what made it special really was that the form itself required certain things to be done that the JSA didn't. For example, the first thing here is that you have to isolate, which means turns off all source of energy. You have to turn it off, lock it out, and lock out, tag out, as they say. It is only authorized by someone called an authorized person. Who can be an authorized person? It can be the safety, but it could also be somebody with the subject matter expert. Then it may not be a safety if somebody else knows about welding, something like that, something that's a little bit more technical anyway. Excavations, and maybe you have someone who had 20 years working in excavation, so maybe that person could be your authorized person to issue the permit and to cancel the permit, right? So the permit also has a time life. It also have to be canceled. I think I mentioned that before already. And it is a form. So my advice here was, if you all have the time, as the new books don't have any samples on them, to download a permit form. I know those of us who work, you all have it, and you probably know it by heart already anyway. And all of it, the only thing though is that NEBOSH is not asking too much of questions on the contents of a permit to work anymore, right? Before, students had to learn 8 of the headings, but that has not come in any of the open book exams before, right? Of which we had 4, right? Confined spaces dictated by the law you're looking at here, the Confined Space Regs 1997. It basically said what a confined space is: a space in which someone could have suffered injury from fire or explosion, unconsciousness, drowning, asphyxiation. And if it meets those categories, then and only then it's classed as a confined space. They mentioned how to get work done in a confined space, looking at all of the hazards and looking at the oxygen content of those vessels and tanks. Emergency rescue was the last part of it. If someone did have to work, and even if you isolated and you ventilated and you train a person, there is still a need then for an emergency rescue team to be standing by. So any questions? I have 3 minutes. Just ask away. Any questions before we close out? I'll probably stop the recording there. Unless if anybody have any questions concerning the content. So read it out, folks. Read your book as well. I'm looking at the book. The page I'm on, I've shouted the page before. They're very, very small paragraphs of these things now. My light is not the best here, but it seems to be page 57 of chapter 3, permit to work is there. The headings I've mentioned, like cancel and stuff, is there. You'll see cancellation on page 59, it looks like. These are the headings on the permit: issue, receipt, cancellation, extension. But it's only 4, and there's way much more than 4. I know I have students here who know these things at the back of their hand, and literally it's more than 4. But then again, like I said, if that's the case, it means that it's no longer on the syllabus, right? But it may be worth your time to download a permit, an actual one, to see what it looks like, as they don't have one. I did take a note of it to email you one in the week. Let me stop the recording here.